Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth.
We come now to our Tuesday-ism, and I've determined today to cover what we call reductionism. Now, you might think that given the fact that it's January and people are trying to follow their New Year's resolutions, that reductionism is about weight loss, reducing our weight, but it's actually a philosophical perspective that can be described in a good way, but can also be described in a bad way. That is, it's something that we should push toward, but something that we can overdo. What we mean by reductionism is the propensity to reduce the complexity of what we're seeking to understand down to one thing. You could argue that reductionism is simply the ism name for the application of the principle of Occam's razor. Occam's razor is named after William of Ockham, and it's a philosophical principle that says that the simplest answer is almost certainly the true one. Let me give you an example. Suppose that you were to turn off the podcast and you were to walk outside and you were to notice that the grass where you're walking is wet. And suppose you said to yourself, or said out loud, I guess it rained earlier. And suppose your neighbor comes along and says, well, it could have rained. Or maybe what happened is that aliens descended from another galaxy through a wormhole, and they found out that when they came into this world, they suddenly inexplicably turned into two hydrogen molecules and an oxygen molecule, and they fell right here on this grass. Now, both of those are explanations for how the grass got wet. One is far more simple, far more plain, far more obvious. That is Occam's razor at work in a good and healthy way, rejecting this complicated and convoluted theory about aliens turning into H2O and falling on the grass. So that's the positive way. And, we want to push in the direction of simplicity in how we understand things. On the other hand, we can step too far. We can oversimplify things, over-reduce things. Again, let me give you an example in philosophy. I have argued that the history of philosophy can be reduced down, and here I am being a reductionist, reduced down to the debate between Parmenides and Heraclitus, two pre-Socratic philosophers. Parmenides said, whatever is. Heraclitus said, whatever is changing. And I've suggested that however you look at it, one side reflects that which, it's a one versus many distinction. Parmenides being the one guy, Heraclitus being the many guy, deduction being a one thing, induction being a many thing, analytic statements being one thing, synthetic statements being many things. And I can just go realism being a one thing and nominalism being a many thing. rationalism being a one thing and empiricism being a many thing. Every single debate in the history of philosophy can sort of come down to that debate. And I think that's, in my judgment, of course, because I'm doing it, following, by the way, in the pattern of Gordon Clark. It's a reduction, but that reduction recognizes that the debate itself is an attempt at over-reduction. That is, that reductionism pushes and says there can't be two things. It can't be one and many. It can't be analytic and synthetic. It can't be rational and empirical. But it is. Because the essence of reality is right there. The essence of reality cannot be reduced to one or many, because the maker of reality is one and three. You can't reduce the Trinity down to one or three. So that's an overly reductionist approach that tries to wipe out, that tries to explain everything with one thing. It's like the unified theory, or the attempt, the search for a unified theory that can explain all the different kinds of energy, and the search for that, which they may never find. Things only reduce so far. So reductionism needs to acknowledge its limitations. It needs to reduce its complications and say this is a good thing, but it can be taken too far. If you remember when we talked about in our curating your book library segment, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, and I just praised Gerard for this just brilliant insight about how things so often work, but I condemned him for saying this is how they always work. So you might want to, take an assessment of yourself. Am I overly reductionistic? Am I insufficiently reductionistic? See what you can find out. It's been quite some time since we've done a segment of heroes you never heard of. And part of the reason for that is I found myself often tempted to sort of reassess the standards by which I made the decision about who to talk about. And as I continued to do so, I came to the place where I thought, what I'd really like to do is remember and give thanks for and give praise to friends. Now, some of the heroes that I listed earlier that I've covered have been friends of mine, and certainly some of my friends are heroes. But not all friends are heroes, and that doesn't mean that they're not heroic. It's just, I'm talking about the nature of our relationship. And I thought there's no better place for me to start this shift, this new segment on friends. Maybe we'll call it Friends or Friends Forever. There's no better person for me to cover than my old friend, Ted Bell. Ted was never my best friend. Ted was never the guy I called when I was in trouble. Ted was never the guy that I spent all my summer days with. In fact, Ted and I rarely talked on the phone, and we really didn't see each other all too terribly much. But Ted is and was that kind of friend that whenever you saw him, whenever you spoke to him, you enjoyed him. You liked him. Ted and I had a relationship over decades. His father was my gym teacher. And he was kind of, at least he seemed that way to little me, kind of gruff fellow. As time's gone on, I come to learn how he's a much more gracious guy than I thought. He was kind of a gruff fella. And I was kind of intimidated by him. Ted, I would see, he didn't go to any of the schools that I went to at any point, but I would see him typically in the context of sports. I played baseball for the Little League team in Stallstown. He played baseball for one of the Little League teams in Ligonier. I played football for the Stallstown football team. He played for the Ligonier football team. And that was the context in which I got to know him. But the thing about Ted was everybody knew him. And everybody liked him. Because he was and is so incredibly likable. Ted is the kind of man that can't go anywhere without having friends. So we became friends. We got a little closer as we got a little bit older. Spent some time together. We went to the Fireman's Fair, hung out together. And then I lost track of him. And he became for me sort of the poster child of the blessings of social media. I found him on Facebook and I followed him and I read his posts and I thought, oh my stars, he is exactly the same guy. This is 30 years since I last spoke to him, and he's the same guy. And in God's providence, I had an opportunity to travel to Western Pennsylvania. I made an effort to see Ted and his wife and took them out for dinner one Christmas time a few years ago and just had the best time. Every now and again, I see Ted tuned in to my Monday night Bible study. Every now and again, he'll make a comment. We have so much in common. We both root for the Steelers, and we both love our hometown, and we just have a history together. I want to be sure, and this is, again, why we're sort of segueing from this Heroes You Never Heard Of segment to this new segment. I want to be sure that before I go, I tell my friends that I'm grateful for their friendship. Some friendships end. Some friendships end badly. Some friendships just kind of pause and wait to be started again. Some friendships fade away, and some are just suspended in animation to restart the moment the opportunity presents itself. If you have a friend like Ted Bell, let me encourage you. Give him thanks for them. Track them down, say hello, and give thanks for them. And Ted, if you're listening, I want you to know that your old friend just delights in you to this day. He finds you to be a deep blessing and he loves you. Ted Bell. Friends are friends forever. My father was a gracious man. He believed, and as per most of the time, I agree with him, he believed a tripartite view of man isn't in itself a terrible thing. My father, however, was no dummy. He believed, and as per once again, I agree with him, often a tripart view of man is accompanied by dangerous error. The Bible talks of men being bodies and souls. It talks of men being bodies, souls, and spirits. It talks of men being bodies, souls, spirits, and minds. Most of the time, those who choose body, soul, and spirit end up just like when you have 3 kids playing together, pushing one to the fringe of the circle. And then they try to dump all the bad stuff there. They seem to reason that my body and my soul are fine. My spirit, though, struggles with this sin. But the real me is my body and soul. Or my body and my spirit are fine. My soul, however, struggles with this sin. But the real me is body and spirit. We're willing to acknowledge the family resemblance, but we push our sins off on our most distant, quote, relative. The real me, however, has more than enough sin to cover 2, 3, 4, or a bazillion parts of me. When I sin, that's me. Yes, it is the old me. Yes, it's the old me that will be left behind when I'm glorified. But for now, it's me. Simul justus et peccator, and all that. That I seek to distance myself from the reality of my sin is more proof that my sin is still with me. The better move is to own it and repent for it. The better move is to learn to recognize the real me. I am not the slightly flawed good man that I pretend to be. I'm not the morally superior exemplar I'd like others to think I am. I'm the sinner, declared to be righteous, indwelt by the Spirit, a saint, growing in grace, certain to one day fully be what I am today declared to be, yes, and still today a sinner. The good news, the great news is that nobody knows the real me more completely than the one who redeemed me. He is too wise to buy into any nonsense that would diminish the reality and scope of my sin. He is aware of it more than I am, more than my most harsh critics, more than those who have seen me at my worst. He, in fact, faced the wrath of the Father for every single one of my sins, whatever dark corner in me they came from. And he loves me. He identifies with me. He promises me that he will lead me into the promised land. that he will never leave me nor forsake me. He will never let me go. The glory is that the me isn't in me at all, but in him, where all my treasures are hidden. And friends, if you are in him, the same is true for you.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.